Madam Chair, if you would read the emergency instructions.
In case of an emergency, please exit to the rear of the chambers. You will have to take the stairs down to the basement, turn right, and exit through the rear door. Please note the elevators will not function. If anyone is unable to use the stairway, please go to the safe room located behind the chambers, caucus room number 2, and emergency personnel will be notified.
Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Tucker Whitman,
Here.
Ben Vitale,
Present.
Mark Farrell is excused, Paul Pinkney,
Here.
Joseph Runkel,
Present.
Keith Batman,
Here.
Hans Petcher,
Here.
Terry Baxter,
Aye.
Joseph Bennett,
Here.
Frank Reginelli,
Here.
Patrick Mahonik,
Here.
Timothy Lattimore is excused, Michael Didio,
Here.
Ryan Foley,
Present.
Michael Chapman.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Remain standing for a moment of silent prayer. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. We have one thing on the agenda this evening, referred to as Ledge 1. That's the only resolution to consider. I do have a sign-up sheet that was, we have 3 people who would like to address this body. We have had some communications. I think everyone has had a copy of the communications. Does anybody need those read? Okay, we'll waive that. So at this time, what I would like to do is I would like to move Ledge 1, accepting and agreeing to the Cayuga Nation of New York proposed cooperation agreement with Cayuga County, pursuant to which grant payments by the nation to the county would be applied to the 2016 town and county village and school taxes, and 2016-17 village and school real property taxes. This is attributed to 9 parcels of real property that are owned by the nation in the county of Cayuga that are not subject to the nation's trust application, currently pending with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Baxter, thank you very much. Any discussion? Mr. Batman?
Will we have an opportunity for discussion after we hear from the people that wish to speak?
Sure. Sure.
I'll hold my comments to then.
Okay. Would everyone like to have these folks speak first? Okay, very good. Mr. Dresser, if you would.
Thank you, Chairman.
Why don't you come right over to the podium, Dave, and...
Good evening. My name is David Dresser. I am officially a consultant on Indian Affairs to the Seneca County Board of Supervisors. I speak tonight only for myself. I do not speak for the board. I wish to place into record 2 documents, and I will read from them. I cannot possibly read all of them, but I believe they're germane to the deliberations you have this evening. The first is a 20-page affidavit, specifically a declaration of Timothy W. Two Guns, which was submitted to the United States District Court, Northern District, by Timothy Two Guns on June 20th, 2005. Basically, Mr. Two Guns accuses Mr. Halftown of misuse of funds within the tribe, improper procedure within the tribe, and I would just like to read a few excerpts from this so you get the sense of it. When Mr. Wheeler informed me in January 2005 that Mr. Halftown unilaterally tried to abandon the settlement agreement with New York State and to determine the nation's contracts with Empire, that's a gambling firm. I was shocked. He goes on to say, in February and March 2005, when I learned about the financial improprieties of Mr. Halftown and his mother Sharon Leroy, I realized that there were a multitude of reasons why Mr. Halftown was acting to assume dictatorial control over the nation and its affairs. Page 13. I was shocked to learn that Mr. Halftown and his mother, Mrs. Leroy, were spending the nation's monies for their own personal benefit. During the ensuing weeks, we learned the charges questioned by the December 17 memo were on credit cards on the account of the nation issued to Mr. Halftown and Ms. Leroy, and that a $5,154.28 Home Depot charge on Mrs. Roy's account related to a new kitchen in the home of one of her sons, Lee Halftown. Under the circumstances, Mr. French is one of the attorneys for Mr. Halftown. Mr. French, under the circumstances for Mr. French to state that he represents the nation and first became involved in this matter in late 2005 is untrue. He first became involved in this matter in December 2004 at the apparent request of Ray Halbritter. He is the CEO of the Oneida Indian Nation. For the sole purpose of protecting Mr. Halbritter and Mr. Halftown's personal accounts. Mr. French's allegiance is not to the Cayuga people and the nation. His motion for this court is self-serving and has nothing to do with the services rendered to the nation. As described above, Mr. Halftown and the interveners, each for their own reasons, have acted in total disregard to the best interests of the Cayuga people and the nation. Our council has become dysfunctional, allowing one small faction to use the nation's assets for their own personal benefit and a second faction to promote their own minority beliefs, each ignoring the best interests of the vast majority of the Cayuga people. Since the nation was not purchasing any land in January, Mr. Wheeler did not deposit the $150,000 check offered to return it to Empire. Reading further, paragraph 63, the unilateral actions of Clint Halftown and the interveners are inconsistent with the traditional ways of the nation in determining its action and governing itself, and in conflict with both resolutions of the council and the June 2nd resolution. You get the flavor of this. I obviously can't read it all, but I would encourage you to get copies of it, and if you're inclined to vote tonight, perhaps you should table it so that you can all read the full document. The second document I will read from is a letter from Mr. Gary Wheeler, who is the third member of the council as determined by the BIA with Mr. Halftown, Mr. Wheeler, and Mr. Two Guns. I read sections. This is straight from the BIA. Quote, the scope of the Bureau's recognition of Mr. Halftown as the Cayuga Nation's representative does not extend to the nation's dealings with any state or local government or sovereign entities, corporations, and other entities or individuals, end quote. On May 11, 2005, an election resulted in a 64% majority voting in favor of a new provisional government which does not include Mr. Halftown. Here are two documents by his current allies that basically call into question the veracity of Mr. Halftown. It seems to me that that it should have a bearing on your decision this evening. I certainly personally urge you to oppose the resolution. Thank you.
Any
Sure.
questions for Mr. Dresser? I have a couple, Dave, if you don't mind. First of all, the first document you referred to is from Timothy Two Guns in 2005.
That's correct.
And that information is standing today.
That is correct.
Nothing has been changed.
That document was filed with the Northern District Court here. It was also filed with the BIA by our attorneys from Seneca County in our response to the 2005 trust application of the Cayuga Nation. It is a public document. It has been in the hands of the BIA, and for the life of me, with that information, I cannot understand how the BIA could continue to recognize him.
I was a little confused because at our last meeting, if you will, with Mr. Halftown, Mr. Two Guns was present and in favor of the agreement that's put forth in this.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
resolution.
What I question is, how are these two people who were opposed to Halftown in 2005 now supporting it? Something is wrong.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Bud Shattuck, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, ladies. I'm Bud Shattuck. I live on 66 Grove Street in Union Springs. I'm a trustee in the village, and I'm the current deputy mayor. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. The subject of this special meeting directly concerns our village, the town of Springport, and all of our residents. Why? Because they already pay taxes in many forms, because it's the law. First, and let me be clear about this, we think any future agreement that allows the Cayuga Indian Nation and their representatives the opportunity to give, to donate, or in any lieu of manner to exchange money for land or use of services is a wonderful thing. The agreement we're addressing tonight is a great first step. With that, I must tell you we collectively are opposed to this particular agreement. It's well known that the village of Union Springs is in dispute with this faction of the Cayuga Indian Nations. In 1958, we adopted a zoning ordinance that made bingo, gambling, gaming illegal. We'll continue to try and enforce those laws. And that only compounds with our lack of being able to collect taxes on village and town property, regardless of someone's reasons for not paying. To Mr. Halftown, all of the residents of the village of Union Springs and the town of Springport are your neighbors. Knock on our doors, call us up. We want to be good neighbors. We're receptive to being part of a silver covenant that involves us in moving forward with this idea. We realize the county doesn't need our permission in how they receive money, but we cannot support this agreement as written. We urge you to table it for reevaluation or to vote no. We look forward to being a part of the future discussions. Thank you. You can have it.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Shattuck? Thank you.
Thanks.
Marilyn Potter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Marilyn Botter. I'm a resident of the town of Springport. I am here this evening to speak regarding the brokered agreement between the legislative chairman and Clint Halftown of the nation. I am not, I'll say it again, I am not supportive of this agreement for the following reasons. It was conducted without the knowledge or input of the local village of Union Springs, the town of Springport, the Union Springs Central School, or the county legislature, especially my representative. Secondly, I firmly believe that taxes on all properties held or owned by the nation should be paid on time and in full. I resent, but I do appreciate the fact that the state of New York has subsidized the taxing authorities for loss of property tax in the past. But these dollars are still my taxpayer dollars paying for something none of the residents should have to pay for. The nation representatives have continually said that they want to be good neighbors. I don't see any action tied to those words. Good neighbors support their community. How about consideration of financial support for the youth of the community, or support of educational trips by the school students? How about support for improving the local park or the museum? Good neighbors do not do things in secret and behind the backs of their community. Until taxes are paid in full and community support is evident, in my opinion, there should be no agreement of any kind. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts and concerns regarding this issue.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Here, Jill, I'll give that back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the floor? Before we do that, let me just say a couple things. We have Mr. Geraldo Rivera, who was here with us once before. He's from the Department of Justice and works with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He is available by telephone. We've got the phone here, and we talked to him a little while ago. He'll be available for about 30 minutes or so to make some comments or answer questions. We also have over here representing the Cayugas, Mr. Eric Facer, Mr. Lee Alcott. We have our own counsel from Harris Beach, Mr. Phil Spillane, and we have Mr. Westfall. All these folks have been involved in the talks for a period of time, and I'm hoping that all the questions can be addressed. So with that, any questions from the floor?
You also have the chief, air chief of the Cayuga Nation, and the faith keeper of the Herod Nation.
Thank you.
of the Cayuga Nation.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. Questions from the floor? Mr. Batman?
I guess, can we start by understanding who actually was in the room when this was negotiated?
Well, first of all, let's put into proper context, negotiated. This is a proposal, okay? And yes, there was back and forth, and requests made, some changes were made, you know? Now, I wanna back up to one of Marilyn's comments, seeing how you brought forth this question. Periodically, the legislature was updated and informed that there were talks going on with the Cayuga Nation. More recently, October the 1st, I personally met with representatives from the Village of Union Springs, the town of Springport. Mr. Batman was present, and an update was given. So, as far as who all was in the room, if you want to go by the last meeting, Mr. Spillane, Mr. Westfall, myself, the sheriff, Mr. Halftown, Mr. Two Guns, Dan French, their other attorney was there. There was another gentleman who I don't recall his name, and then we had Mr. Facer on the phone.
So prior to that meeting, who was in the room?
We
Is that the
conducted a
last
number
one?
of conference calls.
Okay.
BIA was on the phone, a number of times. We had Mike Smith, who's the number 2 guy. We had Mr. Rivera. I don't recall anybody else, but again, the attorneys were all on the telephone, along with the sheriff and I.
May I continue?
Sure.
To clarify that October 1st meeting, because I was there, Mr. Shattuck was there were a couple other people were there. My notes indicate that a couple of things that are of note. One is that that you made the statement that any discussions that were going forward do not involve any givebacks, any quid pro quo, or anything related to the committing or restricting the county or any of the municipalities. When we asked if it would be possible for other people to participate, you made a statement that the Cayugas would not talk to anyone but you. So I want to be clear that is hardly we all appreciated the effort, I'm sure, as I'm sure this body has appreciated on those rare occasions where we've heard some general information. But that is hardly getting an update. That's hardly being brought up to speed. That's hardly being part of the information loop. And I think that's an important issue. The reason that's so important is one of the problems with this agreement is that it's been done without the input, as we've heard here, of the municipalities that are affected, of members of this body, or the public. And that is a major issue. So.
questions? Mr. Pinckney?
As far as the BIA, it was a few years ago that we sat in Washington, across the table, had discussions about this. And since from that point till certainly about 10 days ago, it seems like there's been not much of a movement of recognition. And I'm still puzzled as to why that hasn't been done. So if any of the legal counsel here tonight can give me an update, or the gentleman on the phone, if we so choose to call, can update that, life would be a lot easier with the recognition once and for all from the BIA. And since they stay in the same state, which is in a little bit of a neutral zone, it's hard to move forward with anything going down the road. And appreciation of the efforts made here of some kind of a jest. But again, I'm willing and eager to hear from the council to see if there's any updates on any of those.
Mr. Spillane, do you have anything to add to that?
The recognition, so he was, Mr. Halftown was recognized as the group leader at this point in time, correct?
No.
Well, according to this one document.
There's a series of decisions from the BIA
Okay.
about who's in charge. I think the most recent one was in February of this year that appointed Mr. Halftown as interim, as the nation representative of the last undisputed council, which was 2006. And that was for purposes of contracts in the Indian self-determination. My last contact with the BIA, other than the time a couple of years ago when we were all there, was with me, well, I guess Mr. Rivera was actually with the Department of Justice. Yeah, so I had no further contact with the BIA.
So,
I read its decision.
so again, to that acknowledgement, does it still stand where it does not extend to the nation's dealings with state and local governments? Has any of that changed, or hasn't it?
I know what you're reading from. The most recent word from the BIA is that February 20, 2015 decision. It talks about the continuation of the interim representation representative for purposes of the ID as an Indian self-determination.
Again, one final thing, that would have been based on the prior 2005 acknowledgement, correct?
Yeah, I don't know what you're,
Okay.
I don't mean to be evasive.
No, not at all. And I don't mean to either. I just trying to understand why we haven't moved forward on that. That's cool. Check that out, see if that was still in line from 05 to 15. If anything else has changed, moving forward. That's my question.
Mr. Pinckney, I don't know. I mean, the letter is written to the then Seneca County District Attorney Rick Schweingart and Judge, and Leo Conley, the Seneca County Sheriff. I can't say I've ever seen this before. I certainly have no recollection of seeing it. But I just don't know if this is accurate. The only thing that I know that I can say confidently is what the last BIA document that I've read, which was February 20, 2015. So I just don't know.
Okay.
Mr. Bettman?
Yeah, may I follow up with that? To clarify, and you said this, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. The ruling of the BIA indicated that the interim leadership was for purposes of administration of grants with the BIA.
Correct.
Okay, and you're familiar with Judge Hurd's decision?
I've read it, yes.
Okay, in that decision, unless I'm mistaken, he threw out the suit by Mr. Halftown based upon the fact that he had no jurisdiction to bring suit on behalf of the Cayuga Indian Nation. Isn't that the case? That's my.
I think it was dismissed on standing.
Okay, so what we have then, in terms of the legal foundation of being able to speak for the nation, outside the very limited context as defined by the BIA, we have a court decision and a BIA document which says that Mr. Halftown has no authority to enter into an agreement on behalf of the Cayuga Indian Nation. Is that not, or am I misapplying logic here?
Mr. Adams, I have a copy of the decision, I'm happy to read it again, I'll read you it. But understand, I'm not here advocating.
No, I want to clarify. I don't, and if I'm sounding like, forgive me if my tone sounds like I am. The reason I ask you is because you are a legal expert. I'm not a legal expert. I read the decision, I read the BIA stuff. My conclusion is what I just said. Now, if that's not legally true, then that's all I'm asking.
I think what the decision says is that, that Mr. Halftown doesn't have authority on behalf of the nation to bring that action.
Right. Yes,
And
that's my understanding.
And, you know, as courts do, they'll give a rationale for it. One of the things the court says is, I think it cites to that decision of February 2015, it says, you know, he has authority for the, for existing contracts.
All right.
And there's nothing about future contracts.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
But
Which,
as I say, I'm
right.
not trying to put one or the other.
no, I didn't mean, as I say, it's my high school debate mode, forgive me.
And I mean, along those same lines, you know, this letter, over the years, believe me, I've seen literally thousands of letters dealing with this. I don't know if I've ever seen this, I don't think I have, but.
I haven't seen it, sorry.
Mr. Pacer, did you have something you wanted to
Yes,
add?
I'd like to speak to your question. In reality, from the BIA's perspective, the scope of its recognition of Mr. Halftown, they would tell you, because they have told others in similar circumstances, has no bearing on the decision you make as to whether or not to recognize Mr. Halftown. The BIA is always crystal clear that their recognition is limited to federal jurisdiction, that any state or local government at any time has the latitude to recognize anybody to be the leader of an Indian nation. Not only that, your recognition of a leader of an Indian nation is unilateral. It's your decision. It's not something we agree to, it's unilateral. You can recognize Mr. Halftown for purposes of this agreement, and tomorrow you can say, nah, we don't recognize the BIA in correspondences and other tribal leadership situations has made this perfectly clear. They recognize that often state and local governments will follow the lead of the BIA, but no state or local government is ever required to do so.
Thank you.
Mr. Baxter?
Yes, I wondered if it would be a good time to make the phone call to Mr. Rivera.
Sure.
And ask him if, Mr. Halftown has the authority to write that check and send it to us.
Dave, could you come up so we could? Maybe you'll break the dial right.
Or you always want to be,
Telephone operator.
Hello, Ronaldo. Mr. Rivera, Dave Gould, how are you? Good, how are you? Good, sir. I'm gonna turn you over to our county chairman, Mike Chapman.
Hi,
Good evening, Mr. Rivera, how are you?
I'm good, Chairman. How are you doing today?
We're doing very well. We're in the midst of this meeting to consider the proposal from the Cayuga Nation, particular to Cayuga County properties. A number of questions have come up with regard to whether or not Mr. Halftown would have authority to make such a proposal or enter into such an agreement. We're just looking for some words of wisdom from your perspective, whether this might be good, bad, or indifferent.
As a mediator in this, it would be good, because they are authorized to enter into, they are, the component in Cayuga County of the last federally recognized, government for Cayuga Nation. That's Clint Halftown, Gary Wheeler, and Tim Tugan. And that is who we are also negotiating with around their issues. But they have they have governmental authority to enter into government relations with you.
Okay.
And it would be, the other thing is that it'd be a good thing, because where we're at with both sides of this, which is not germane to your decision as the county legislature, but where we're at is precisely getting each side to come into these kinds of law enforcement agreements to maintain the peace of the property that they currently operate in the respective counties.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Rivera? Everybody hear what he had to say? Council, any questions?
No.
We're good? Okay, well, thank you very much for your input, sir, and we wish you well.
Oh, thank you. Everybody have a wonderful holiday season, and I'm encouraged that the legislature takes this move for public safety and security in the county. It'll be a good step forward.
Very good. Thanks again. You have great holidays as well.
Thank you so much, Chairman.
Any other questions? Mr. Runkle?
This one's for Fred. We are proposing entering into this contract. What risk, legal, unforeseen, would you see for the county in signing this?
Well, if you're asking for legal advice, I'm gonna suggest that Mr. Spillane and I talk to you in executive session, because we may be getting into areas of strategy, and I would not wanna reveal that here. But my understanding is that this agreement, I was listening to Mr. Rivera, seems to think that Mr. Halftown has the authority to enter into this type of agreement. The taxes under the agreement are being proposed to be paid for 2016, and then the agreement is either renegotiated or not.
I would ask council to correct me if I'm wrong. We talked about this in our meeting, both in conference calls and physically the last time we met. Cayuga County's not offering any special recognition. It has no authority to grant any special recognition to Mr. Halftown or Mr. Tugans or Mr. Wheeler or whomever comes forth with a proposal. From my perspective, this appears to be an opportunity to alleviate the pressure for this body to stop taking money from every other taxpayer and making Union Springs, Springport, and the school system whole. I don't see anything more complicated than that. There is nothing binding here in the sense of a contract that we would have the ability to enforce. Anybody can walk away at any time. It appears that this is a fresh start. It's an offer to get the taxes paid. And this body in 2016 will have the opportunity to meet with Mr. Halftown and his counterparts to maybe enhance an agreement for the future. Now, somebody asked me the other day, there must be an advantage for the Cayugas and there must be something else going on. And I said, well, you know, there's no free lunch. Yes, you heard what was alluded to before. Mr. Pinckney spoke about it. He was there in Washington with us, as was Mr. Spillane. The Deputy Secretary of the Interior sat there and said, you know, it'd be a good thing if you guys could get together and have some kind of an agreement. I know from talking to Mr. Rivera, he related that the BIA has told the Cayuga Nation and its representatives that it would be a good thing if you could have some kind of an agreement with the municipality. What effect will it have in the future? I don't know. We were told when we were in Washington that land and trust is coming someday. Don't know how many acres, don't know what day or what year it might happen. So does this make us look to be in a better position? I'd say so. There's a benefit to it. I would really like to say that we are thinking about all the taxpayers in this county. Regardless of what Senator Nozzolio can send to us, or the governor can send to us, to pay those taxes, if you will, in Union Springs and Springport and the school. There's no free lunch, somebody's gotta pay them. We've been doing that, we have an opportunity to stop that. We have a group here who has possession, if you will, the authority, the dollars that they've offered to pay those taxes in arrears and taxes going forward in this particular part of the county. It seems to me it would be it's a pretty straightforward manner in which to get those taxes covered and to keep the door open for future negotiations. Mr. Mahoney.
I would like to have Mr. Runkle's question answered, so I'd make a motion to go into executive session.
Very good. Is there a second? Second. Mr. Bennett? All in favor of executive session? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Sheriff, I would ask you to stay and Mr. Orman to stay. Mr. Spillane? Good enough? Okay. Everyone else would adjourn to the hallway, we'll be in good shape. You stay here, please. Agreement. And that would be on page 2 of the agreement. To Mr. Batman's point, where it, under section 1, where it says Cayuga County and each municipality shall maintain a government-to-government relationship with the Cayuga Nation in the spirit of the covenant chain of friendship. I would strike the word shall, and I would substitute the word should. Is there a second?
I know. Make it.
The second paragraph?
Under number 1.
Right in the middle of the page, paragraph 1.
I'll second.
We have a second, Mr. Baxter. Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Any discussion on that phrase? If not, all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Amended. Now, Mr. Batman.
Yes, I'd like to call for a caucus, if I may.
Okay, very good. It's 7:08. How much time do you think you're gonna need?
3 hours.
3 hours, okay, 3 hours it is. How about 3 hours and 10 minutes? Thanks very much.
When's Christmas?
The meeting is adjourned for a caucus.